Welcome to transferring an image from one etching plate to another. We're going to start right from the beginning here, putting on gloves, and I have a plate that I'm going to ink up in black ink. I'm using, in this case, Hanchi black ink. It's a really lovely ink. Opening up the can, I'm going to scrape out a thin layer. I'm going to try not to gouge the ink. Put it onto the glass and get it warmed up. What I'm going to be doing here is starting with the plate that has the image on it that I would like to transfer to at least one other plate. Now keep in mind, everything I'm doing here could be, by extension, a third plate or a fourth plate and so on. I start off by inking the plate in a regular fashion. I don't have to be too careful here. I'm not going for a perfect impression, and in fact, what you'll see as we go on is that I'm not going to be wiping this plate perfectly. I'm not going to even bother with the piece of phone book. I will go to my tarlatan, clean bit of tarlatan, wrapped up, and begin wiping away the ink, making sure that I'm getting it into all of the lines and all of the imagery on the particular plate. And like usual, once the tarlatan is saturated, I can open it back up, find a cleaner spot, and carry on from there. So the point of what we're doing is to ink this plate up so that we can take a nice dark impression onto a piece of printmaking paper on the press, and then the ink that is on that paper, transfer it onto a prepared plate that is identical in size to this one, but it has been prepared with hard ground. So in just a moment here, we're going to kind of go back in time and prepare an identically sized, and I cannot overstate this, as perfectly identical as possible, a perfectly identical plate to this, which we will have prepared on the hot plate with hard ground, with one extra little trick which we're going to see in just a moment. But here's just a little reminder, it does not have to be a perfect plate, and if you were to zoom in on this plate, you would see that it's quite messy, and you really wouldn't want to print this on its own on a good sheet of paper and hope that it's going to be clean. In particular, the plate tone is pretty messy here. I don't even have to be terribly fussy about using my red rag to hit the edges, but I'm going to make sure that there aren't any big blobs of ink. So let's take a second and go back in time. I've got another plate that's the exact same size as the one you just saw me inking. It has been degreased and placed on the hot plate. The hot plate is hot, and I've put hard ground on this. I'm using the hard ground roller, and I've put on an appropriate amount of hard ground, and I'm going to roll it on evenly to the plate. This plate is hot. I'm going to be careful taking it off. I'm going to set it down on the glass. And before I move on to the next step, while the hot plate is hot, I'm going to use the hot plate to roll my brayer, and that's going to take the majority of the hard ground off. I'll set this aside and I'll clean it in the usual fashion. And then, being careful not to burn my little fingies, I'm going to take my blue shop towel and wipe it off the hot plate. And that's all you need to do for the hot plate. So even though this piece of copper has cooled down, I want it as cold as I can get it. So I'm going to run it underneath cold water at the sink. Nothing special about this, it's cold water. And now we're back to the press. So here's the plate that I had been inking just a minute or two ago. I've got it on a template on a piece of mylar. I'm being very careful about lining it up. I've got a piece of paper that has been soaking in the bath for at least half an hour. This paper can't be too small. Here's the trick. This paper has to be long enough so that when we print it, we can actually stop the roller and leave the paper trapped. You'll see what I mean in just a second here. So spin the press, whichever press you happen to be using, it's regular printing pressure, and we stop so that our printing paper is trapped underneath the roller. So why is it trapped? Well, we want to control the variables here. We want to ensure that this paper doesn't move, because what we're going to do is place our hard ground plate, the one that we've just prepared and that we've cooled down. We could have prepared it yesterday or the day before, but it's a prepared hard ground plate with otherwise nothing on it. We're going to line it up really carefully back on the mylar, lower our paper, lower the blankets, and roll it back through to the other side. When we lift up the blankets on the other side, we're going to see that we have transferred the imagery from the paper, from the print, onto this blank plate. I'm pulling it up very, very slowly because I don't want my paper to stick. There's our impression up close. I'm going to crunch it up and throw it away. It's not a good impression. We're not trying to keep it. This is what we're going for. When we look up close at our plate, you can see that what we have done is we have put black printing ink on top of the hard ground, and there's the plate that we transferred from. So why are we doing this? So that we know where image number 1 is precisely on plate number 2. The thing to understand here is that the transferred ink is sitting on top of hard ground. If we were to put MAC tack on the back of this plate and etch it, there would be nothing to etch. What this is doing for us, though, again, is providing a guide. Shows us where the image from plate number 1 is and where it will be relative to plate number 2. This permits us to do really finely detailed and highly registered work if we want to. You don't necessarily have to, but in this case, I will begin with my etching needle, carefully and meticulously tracing out at least part of the image that I've transferred onto this plate, because I want to know where these elements of the image will be when they finally print together as a multi-plate etching. I can do as much or as little of this. I could go all the way around if I choose to. I might have an interesting idea for what's going to happen in the middle of this plate, or just the edges or that particular thing up on the corner. Once I have done the tracing that I want to do, I'm going to etch this for 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes, and then I'm going to take it out of the acid and clean it off. Clean it off like any other plate with hard ground. The transferred ink will come off, the hard ground will come off, and I'll be left with a very faintly etched line that can serve as a guide for whatever else I want to put onto this particular plate. Hard ground, soft ground, sugar lift, photo etching. It's up to you.